The fading light of day bled across the sky, setting the vast wilderness ablaze with streaks of amber and rose. Vera stood by the riverbank, the chill of the evening air nipping at her skin as she observed the mother bear and her cub huddled together for warmth. The harsh winter had tested their resolve, and it was clear they were on the edge of survival. She made a vow in her heart as the wind whispered through the trees. No matter what it took, she would not let them fall to the cold. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the forest was buried under a heavy blanket of snow, muffling all but the crunch of Viera's boots as she carefully navigated the frozen ground. Across from her, Orla lay curled around her cub, the golden fur of their coats almost indistinguishable from the snow that dusted them both. The cub stirred weakly, its movements slow and labored, an unmistakable sign of just how precarious their lives had become. A faint rustle from the tree line caught her attention. Eric emerged, his breath visible in the cold air, the weight of his pack resting heavily on his broad shoulders. His brow furrowed, concern deep in his eyes. "They're still holding on," he said softly, his tone heavy with worry. But just barely. Vera clenched her jaw, determination settling over her features. She hasn't moved from this spot. She knows it's the safest place. For the past 2 days, they discovered more traps buried beneath the snow, rusted steel jaws, still sharp and lethal. Each one felt like a blow to their efforts, a reminder of the battle they were fighting to protect the creatures of this land. "She's smart," Vera said, watching as Orla's head lifted, her nostrils flaring as she tested the wind. "Smart doesn't make her invincible." Eric adjusted the strap of his pack, his voice darkening. "If the poachers return—" "They won't," Vera cut him off, her voice a steely promise. "We'll make sure of it." Eric didn't argue. Instead, he turned his gaze to the bears. "What's the plan?" Vera hesitated, weighing her options. "We need to get them away from the traps. There's a den upriver, about 2 miles. It should be empty, sheltered." Eric's brow furrowed in doubt. "You think Orla will just follow us there?" Vera allowed herself a small, confident smile. "She won't follow us directly, but if we set the trail right, she'll find it." They worked swiftly, placing fish, berries, and nutrient-rich supplements along the river's edge, crafting a subtle trail leading toward the den. Every action was deliberate, every movement measured. Vera knew the risks they were taking, but leaving Orla and her cub to fend for themselves was simply not an option. As they scattered the final portion of food, a sudden noise broke the stillness of the forest, a crunching sound from the distance. Both Vera and Eric froze, instincts immediately on alert. From the tree line emerged 2 figures, heavily clothed, rifles slung across their backs. Poachers. Eric's fingers brushed the tranquilizer gun at his side, his body tense. The larger of the 2 men, a towering figure with a thick beard, stepped forward, a sneer curling his lips. "Didn't expect to run into you 2 again," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. Vera held her ground, her voice unwavering. "This is protected land. Leave now." The man chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Protected? Didn't stop that bear from tearing up our traps." "She was defending her cub," Vera snapped, her anger flaring. "And those traps are illegal." The second man, lean and wiry, smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "You can't stop us. Nature plays by its own rules." Eric stepped forward, his tone calm but firm. "One of those rules is that you stay out of this area. Leave now, or we'll have the rangers here in minutes." Before the poachers could respond, the forest came alive with a low, menacing growl, a sound that vibrated through the ground. Orla emerged from the tree line, her massive frame casting a shadow that stretched across the clearing. Her dark eyes locked onto the poachers, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The burly man staggered back, his bravado evaporating in an instant. "You've got to be kidding me." The cub let out a soft chirp, a stark reminder of the stakes. Orla moved forward, slow and deliberate, her presence radiating a quiet, terrifying power. No one moved. Finally, the poachers turned and retreated, disappearing back into the forest, their footsteps fading with the wind. Viera exhaled sharply, her body trembling with relief. "That's twice she's saved us," Eric murmured, awe in his voice. "She's not just smart, she's fearless." Viera nodded, her chest tight with emotion. "She knows what's worth fighting for." As the hours passed, Orla moved cautiously along the trail, her cub following close behind. Viera and Eric hung back, careful not to disturb the delicate balance they had created. Each step was a victory, however fragile, and they both knew the weight of the task at hand. By the time they reached the rocky outcrop that concealed the den, the sun was low, casting a warm glow across the landscape. Orla sniffed around the entrance, her movements careful but with a quiet determination. After a long moment, she stepped inside, her cub at her side. They melted into the shadows, finding refuge in the sanctuary of their new home. A wave of relief washed over Viera, though a deeper, more complex feeling lingered in her heart. Letting go was never easy. "She made it," Eric said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "You gave her a chance." Viera's smile was small, but it spoke volumes. "She did the hard part. We just helped." As they turned to leave, the forest fell silent once more, the den standing as a symbol of hope against the cold cruelty of winter. The next morning, Viera stood at a distance, watching the den's entrance. Orla was resting, really resting, for the first time in what felt like days. The sight filled Viera's heart with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the journey ahead would not be without struggle, but it was a journey that had a chance. "She did it," she whispered, almost to herself. Eric nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "With a little help." Viera exhaled, rubbing the chill from her arms. "It's hard to let go." "They'll keep going," Eric said softly. "That's what they do." Orla stirred, lifting her head and meeting Viera's gaze. For a fleeting moment, their eyes locked, an unspoken connection, a shared understanding. Viera raised a gloved hand in a small, gentle wave, a gesture that felt silly, but she hoped Orla understood. The mother bear gave a soft huff before nuzzling her cub and rising to her feet. The cub followed, shaky but determined. Together they disappeared into the forest, their silhouettes fading into the vast wilderness. Hours later, back at their base camp, Viera sat at her desk, her journal open in front of her. The pen moved slowly across the page, each word deliberate. Orla reminds me of the raw power of resilience, of a mother's unwavering love, and the strength that comes from never giving up, even when survival feels impossible. She set the pen down and gazed out the window, where snowflakes drifted lazily through the air. The world outside still felt cold, but somehow it didn't seem so daunting anymore. That evening, as Viera and Eric sat near the fire, the weight of exhaustion settling in their bones, Eric lifted his coffee in a quiet, meaningful toast. To second chances. Viera clinked her mug against his, the warmth spreading through her chest. The path ahead was uncertain, but in that moment she knew that she had been part of something far greater than herself. And somewhere, deep in the wilds, Orla and her cub would carry on, strong, resolute, and unbroken.